Hi, thanks for tuning in to our Practical Nerds weekly podcast. I'm Shub, and together with my partner and co host Patric, we normally invest in founders in design, construction, renovation, and logistics technology. Many of our friends in the ecosystem wanted us to start a podcast on the built world, and in return, we decided to honor their request with a show about nothing at all. So, Patrick, a few months ago, we did a first of its kind episode, which was a in real life episode. Seems like
Right.
now we're doing a different, another first of its kind episode, but of a completely different one, where one of us, in this case you, is on the move while
Oh yeah,
doing practical nerds.
that's right. I'm on the move because you choose a different lifestyle than me. So you live much more centrally in
Uh-huh.
the places that you live, and you actually typically have airport hubs, while I'm a little bit more favoring the remote rabbits, lakes, foxes, forests, and mountains lifestyle. And so I have to be in a car in order to get to a central airport hub. In my case, it's Frankfurt in Germany. And so I'm on my way there in order to actually meet you in real life
That's
again,
true.
just abroad.
That is very true, sir. That is very true. Um, I think on that subject, on the question of moving somewhere to meet people,
Hmm.
isn't that something which a lot of our brethren in the investing community, maybe even the founder community, does it often feel like that's what kind of becomes their default job description sometimes to get to events, conferences, things of that sort?
Yeah, it can feel like that. So you and I, we discussed in the pre-brief. So today will not be about any recommendations or suggestions, endorsements, optimism, skepticism, nothing like that. It will just be about personal preferences. So your and my personal preference, and I think we're trying to give a window here just into our personal preferences. And I think we're doing a reasonable good job of giving people an impression of who you and I are. But today, perhaps even a little bit deeper, just purely talking about personal preferences when it comes to conferences and events, right? So
Hmm.
that's it. And I find it difficult to pass judgment on um, whether others should do conferences or events or not, because it's super contextual, context specific.
Hmm.
And I think it's super preference specific. And so I can kick us off here, Shub. So my personal, observation is when let's actually, let's start with COVID. How about we start with that as a starting point? So, I mean, like so many people, and I'm assuming like you, I know exactly where I was the moment I realized that COVID is going to hit us really hard. For me,
Yes.
that was late December 2019, which was the
Hmm.
first, and COVID had been breaking out in China for a couple of weeks before that.
Yes.
And I know exactly where I was, what I thought at the time, etc. And yet it took another 8 to 9 weeks until it really arrived in Europe and the US. And with it, for 2 years at least, we had social distancing, if you remember that.
Yep.
We had, in some countries, curfews and please stay at home.
Yes.
Um, and it was really life changing. And so if you were
Hmm.
in the events industry at that time, those were not 2 good years. Hospitality
Hmm.
struggled a lot, needed a lot of government support in order to survive these difficult times. And there was a point in time during this period, of course, finally meetings moved online, right? That was the key
Yep.
change, right? And so it sounds so obvious
Hmm.
today, but man, it's 5 years ago that this started, believe it or
I
not, right?
know. Yes.
Um, and during this process, there was a big part of me actually that thought, okay, now we're past events as mankind. Now we
Hmm.
figured out how to actually get things truly done in a digital collaborative way. Boy, was I wrong, right? So the
Hmm.
event industry and the conference industry, I mean, do you see any difference compared to before 2020? Do you?
No, in fact, if anything, I think it's rebounded stronger than ever before. I think there's more events, more conferences, more such discussions, etc., happening than ever before.
Right? So, I mean, we
Yeah,
certainly,
certainly.
you're not, yeah, you and I, we get a lot done, and as do many other people, remotely, because the mutual exceptions of actually getting things done remotely, I would say it's much, much, much higher than 2020. That didn't rebound. So that is a clear uplift. But at the same time, um, you see high demand for meeting people in real
Mhm.
life at conferences. It's just not my demand. So coming to the preferences, right? And then I'd love to hear yours as well. So for me, um, it comes down to ROI. So the ROI on not working, and I define working here as meeting founders, thinking, analyzing, acquiring primary information, meeting my partners, um, thinking about how to develop our business further, how to be a, you know, better contributor to the partners that we have, both on the investor and founder side. All of that is work you don't get to do the moment you get in the car, and then the plane or the rail or whatever, however you get there, and then you actually spend the time there. It's just not happening, right? And so, at least not for me.
Mhm.
And when I am on logistics, en route, and then at there, literally I only get two activities done, and both of them are talking. The first one is phone calls, and the second one
Mhm.
is face to face discussions. So I literally only get that done. And for me, the ROI on that caps out without having time to actually think, process, take decisions, and take action in between, which is why the number of events and conferences that I can get an ROI from per year is extremely limited. So for me, it's maybe two. And that has to be like high quality to me,
Mhm.
high value to me kind of events where I can really soak a ton of primary information and, make connections, friends. That's a,
Yes.
of course, a great side benefit. Um, but there's just not that many events where I can get that. And so then I would just hang around and I would just basically soak in information that I already have or meet people that already trust me, that I already trust. And then the incremental value of being there versus the incremental loss of not doing the other work related parts that I just mentioned, that ratio is not good for me then. So there's
Mhm.
literally only a very small handful of events and conferences where I can get my personal ROI. But how is it for you?
Yeah. Actually, okay. So, you and I have, of course, been talking about this for years. And I think you referenced COVID. I think this first became a relevant question for you and me on what our stance is on events and conferences. I remember we had this chat sometime in 2023. I remember. And both of us felt, and this is when COVID was more or less done and dusted, and events were sort of coming back in a big way. And that's when you and
Mm.
I, we realized that we feel very similarly about the importance of events, or at least the frequency with which events and conferences should be done. And I think both of us independently voiced our opinions at the time that in our own private circles that we don't attend events and conferences too much. And I think quite often it seemed to me like we were like these odd people or outliers in our industry
Yeah,
who
I
aren't
think so.
fans of this. But there was a very interesting turning point for me, which I think convinced me that, or convinced is not the right word, but gave me some sort of credence as to what the problem might be with our profession and our profession's liking for conferences, events. So, one of the capital allocators that we had met, and one of our favorites, Patrick, had told us last year, a little over a year ago, when they were commenting on a few other fund managers, that hey,
Oh,
those guys spend way too much time in events, right? And for me it was actually surprisingly insightful and interesting. That, by the way, there's an audience which also looks at this stuff
Mm,
and judges you, and it made me wonder what that actually says about um, allocation of time. So you and I have spoken at various points of time. In the case of a startup founder or a startup CEO, the number one, by far the most important role they play is capital allocation, right? And of course, that is also true for you and me, and for any other fund manager.
indeed.
Uh, but the other very important very important resource, I should say, or very important constraint we have, which is where we have to always decide how to allocate it to optimally always make best decisions, is how we use our time, right? So, what does it say if you're spending a very significant chunk of your time, as you rightly said, traveling to get to a conference, right? Spending time there, etc., and hanging out, and then sort of being in anticipation of the next event or conference.
Yeah.
So that, I think, immediately tells me from outside in, and possibly to other capital allocators, that that fund manager has decided, of all the things they could be doing with their time, this is what merits their best allocation. And therefore, perhaps the other things they could be doing with their time are not that much more useful than attending events and conferences. So, what would
I
that
think
say
that's a
about
fair
that?
statement.
Yeah.
Fair statement. I think that, I mean, that's not passing judgment either, right? That's just a logical conclusion. So if you assume a rational actor on the other side, they have literally determined that this is the best use of their time. Yeah,
Yeah.
true.
Isn't that
And it might be.
fascinating? Yeah.
I was going to say, right? It might be. I mean, I can think of investment. So I think, sorry, I'm taking us quickly on a detour, but I promise I bring us back on this topic. So I was speaking literally an hour ago while I was in the car. I was speaking with a friend who's launching a new fund setup,
Mm-hmm.
and he wanted to spar with me about strategies, and we landed on the topic of portfolio strategy and granularity. And one of the biggest and repeatedly told lies in venture is that you need, when you do early stage, a portfolio of 30, 35 companies in order to drive good returns. It's in my opinion, in my experience, which by now I consider ample experience, one of the biggest told lies. Which, by the way, goes hand in hand with the biggest finance lie ever told, which is that returns should be managed with diversification.
Mm-hmm.
Completely wrong. If you want unreasonable returns, you need a portfolio size of one, and you need to be right about it. That's not my recommendation. I'm not suggesting you do that, but it's just a statistical fact. So I was discussing with him, and I was saying, look, I mean, so he's looking at a 30 to 40 million first fund. He's an emerging manager, terrific executive track record,
Mm-hmm.
terrific network in his industry. It's going to be a niche strategy. And I said to
Mm-hmm.
him, you have two strategies here for portfolio granularity. Sorry, I should be perhaps more careful with the word. There are two directions that you can take the portfolio granularity on your strategy. Either you go hyper concentrated in spite of being early stage. So you're looking for 10 to 15 super high conviction portfolio, and you're still aiming for ownership that is substantial given your portfolio and your capital commitments of 30, 40, 50 million. And the other direction that you can take is, and that is statistically much more of a certainty that you will deliver 3 to 4x, is if you go a portfolio size of 100 and you actually do not worry about ownership.
Yeah.
I always get mad when people out of the discussion of the best generalist VCs on this planet leave Fabrice Grinder out of it. I wouldn't call him my friend, whatever. We have chatted before, but I have a tremendous respect for him. And I don't think he actually knows that. He is delivering returns that are completely destroying practically every venture fund, and by far almost every venture fund that has a, let's say, bigger quote unquote brand name than his. And one of his strategies is that he actually builds very large portfolio sizes, which are extremely resilient. And it is statistically proven, just
Mm-hmm.
research it yourself, look it up, that with this kind of a strategy, an early stage venture, you can achieve a much higher certainty of a 3x fund. Now, is 3x fund the ambition that you should go for? That's for anyone to decide. But if you, 3x over 7 years is basically, what's that? A more or less 22% net IRR.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry,
More or
gross
less.
IRR, and then comes the fees. So,
Yeah.
you would be killing a lot of fund managers, and you would definitely be better than the S&P 500. So it's a legit
Mm-hmm.
strategy that you can go. Now, the reason why I say that, now bringing us back into the conference and events thing. So if you're building a portfolio size of 100, and then your strength is not going to be, and part of your model is not going to be a better picker than anyone, to
Mm-hmm.
be doing more sophisticated analysis, using unfair insight into picking, etc. No, it's literally going to be on top of every founder that in your space you perhaps have some heuristics, some methods to kind of acquire your founder taste, and then you want to be in every of those deals, which then oftentimes people who run that strategy would do a high relationship kind of a game. And for that, being at every kind of event and conference then actually fits the strategy. So then in that context, I completely understand why someone with that strategy would do
Mm-hmm.
that. If, however, you're choosing the other strategy, I can tell you that is a complete waste of your time. There's absolutely nothing that you will learn at these conferences more than once, twice, or maybe 3 times a year that will make you a better picker of a portfolio size of 10 to 15 than anyone else. So then you need to play a completely different game, and then allocating 50% of your time of being at conferences wouldn't seem to me like something I would do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, this was longer than I intended, but I hope it makes sense.
Oh no, I think you. So firstly, I think that was not a distraction at all. I think it's very relevant for what we are discussing, and it also ties in quite nicely with what I was also thinking on this topic. So I feel like if you are a fund manager where this is what you need to do, and by this I mean attending lots of conferences and events is your best shot at building relationships, sure, I think go ahead, I suppose. But what that also implies is you start off with the basis of events and conferences being the best way to expand your network, right? Historically, and I think there's enough evidence to show that, is also been our experience at Fundamental, is actually that's not how you build the most robust and highest quality relationships in the startup and VC world. All right. So keep in mind that's also what is being broadcasted by your decision to attend a ton of conferences, etc. And if that's your primary way of networking, you know, the
Mm.
other the other aspect which I think is less appreciated or less understood, but I think especially in a Gen Z, phrase, you have very short attention spans, influencer-led content, etc. It's very easy to create your own echo chamber where you fall into these multiple echo chambers created by events, conferences, panel discussions, where you convince yourself that because you got yourself a little bit of an audience, that now you've made it, and that's the achievement,
Mm.
etc. In other words, you've shifted the goalpost, you've changed the goalpost possibly from, hey, I need to deliver so and so returns, etc. I need to find the best companies, to I've put myself out there, I got quote unquote validation, right? And that's an accomplishment. So I also feel there's a little bit of slicing up of what KPIs actually matter, and I think that's where I see a distortion in the market, in how these things are being played out.
I think that's a brilliant observation. I hadn't thought about it that way. So are you also saying then one manifestation of that effect would be when I attend a lot of conferences and at the third, fourth, fifth, 10th, I always see the same people and I hang out with the same people. Would that be a manifestation of that?
Yes, it would. It would. By the way, I know I'm taking a very hard shot at our VC profession, but hey, a lot of this also applies to a lot of founders. A lot of founders, in my opinion, also spend way too much time on these events, seem to derive, way too much validation, way too much personal validation from
Yeah,
attending such events. And unfortunately, they all sort of come together. So it becomes, so these echo chambers tend to coalesce and they give each other validation.
I remember one of the investments that is not doing as good as the others in our portfolio. The founder um, in the first year optimized for meeting other founders and VCs at conferences rather than actually spending time on doing what a CEO should be doing, which a lot of that has to do with capital allocation, talent acquisition, um, making strategic decisions, meeting customers, etc. And he was literally prioritizing tech events. And so it didn't take me long to see that. And the colleague that was also working with me together in that relationship, and let it be 3 months. It might have been actually been quicker, 2 months, where
Mhm.
we called him up twice and we said, "Hey, you need to stop this. This is not something that will get you anywhere, to
Mhm.
any place good. It will just cost you a lot of things, of good decision making, etc." And I'm not sure what his reaction was. It might have been a nod and a confirmatory thing. It might have been a pushback. I don't remember, but his actions didn't change. So he did exactly that. Uh, all I can tell you is it's not a company that will deliver us much return other than getting our money back, probably.
Mhm.
Um, Now, people might say, hey, there could be other reasons for that. No, this is literally the core reason, because this founder doesn't respect what it takes to actually build a business, and
Mhm.
rather thought he could network himself to um, to substance, to good business, to revenue, etc. And then he even picked the wrong audiences for that. If he had said, "Hey, I'm going to attend all these industry conferences, and here's my strategy, and this is what I'm doing, and this is how it's leading to revenue or to PLCs, design partnerships, all these kinds of things that might be your objective in year one," completely different discussion. But he didn't do that. He was like, "No, let me hang out with VCs because they might lead my next round."
Actually,
Okay.
this triggers a deeper philosophical thought in my mind, which I hadn't even thought about it before you just said what you said. I think in an episode we had done maybe a few weeks ago, we spoke about how an extremely important trait, in fact, perhaps like a complete one-to-one correlation with success, is the ability or and the ability and the willingness for founders to hone in on their bottlenecks, focus on that,
Yes.
stay focused on that until it is resolved.
Yes.
I would say that's also true, by the way, for us as VCs and fund managers. So the
Yes.
way I think of it, and I think it's very similar with you, Patrick, is the reason both you and I typically end up doing only two events or conferences a year is we feel those kind of help us in certain ways in
Yeah.
debottlenecking certain things we are looking for. Um, I think where it becomes problematic in my view, so I think if it fits in, if you're a founder or a VC listening to this, I think that's fine. And in my opinion, that's strategic, certainly aligns with my view. I think where it becomes very problematic is when you realize that either you have no idea what your bottleneck is or you have no idea how to fix it. And then you think you can sort of fill that void by just sort of randomly filling it with other things,
Yeah.
other uses of your time, other uses of what may seem like social validation,
Yeah.
by saying, I went to this one event, that event. Um, that is just a destruction of capital or a destruction of time in another form.
And there's a very simple test for this that I recommend to anyone, um, to understand the perspective that you're taking. So the thought experiment is the following. Imagine you built a big profitable business. Take whatever number, right? Okay, let's say it's 100 million revenue business with a 10% net income margin. and you built this for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, the way we build companies, and it's your business. Okay. And now you want to retire and you're hiring your succession.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You remain a shareholder. You're hiring someone to run the business for you. What would be, that's the thought experiment, what would be your reaction if that person hung out 50% of their time at Google conferences, Burning Man, this industry tech conference, that one? What would be your reaction? I cannot imagine people listening to this and saying, yeah, I mean, it's probably a good idea. I cannot imagine.
Yeah, you're right.
So if there's a bottleneck behind that, then you would probably say in that situation, okay, great. I understand how that helps us remove this bottleneck. An example could be if you are the employed CEO of a publicly listed company, which is, let's say, almost criminally undervalued by the capital markets, maybe targeted by short sellers unfairly, then spending 50% of your time road showing with institutional investors is actually working on your bottleneck. So that's then a great idea. If you are, I don't know, launching a new business line, and for that you need to understand the supply market, and then spending 3 months touring every event there is where you can meet all the suppliers, again, probably a great idea in the context of bottleneck removal for what you're being paid to do. But if it's just a general MO to eat cookies somewhere else because you hate your kids and you like to sleep better in a hotel, while they are crying at home and you leave your partner tending to them. Sorry, I'm not making this shit up. This is literally what people tell me why they like to go to conferences.
That's right. Yeah.
Sorry, I think you're just not being honest to yourself then. Yeah. So there are reasons why to do it. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one other hypothesis I have, I think there is an aspect of social validation, maybe a dopamine hit from seeing, hey, I was on this event, people like me, and by like, I mean social media like, right? Not social media like, but people have communicated on social media that they've liked me there. And that makes me feel good in the moment. I think,
Nice.
unfortunately, in a weird way, that's feeding into this whole exercise, and which is why I also think there's a distortion in what really matters.
Yeah.
And
What about what do you think about the aspect of having a good time and just enjoying the time, being out, meeting people, perhaps in a nice place, etc., and kind of under the work hard, play hard philosophy? How would you rate that?
I think there is a place for that as well. I think so. Depending on either if it helps build a deeper bond with the other people present there, as in it's a more informal environment, or that's the environment where you actually get to build a more deeper and intimate bond with those people, which will allow the relationship to become more meaningful to both parties. I think there is absolutely a place for such events. There aren't too many events which do that, unfortunately. I
Hmm.
think I think most events have this forced sense of um, because keep in mind, most events, not all, but most events also have sponsors, also have people who want to create this like a program where they are shown to be speaking on it, or propagating it through various agenda items and so on, and that can create constraints to the format you just spoke of. But hypothetically, if you truly have an event like the one you described, I think there is value for it, especially if the audience is carefully curated, and each or most of those members are hard to access, and are also on the
Hmm.
lookout for people of a similar stature, let's say.
Hmm. So the one that comes to mind with regard to that. So have you ever watched House of Cards?
No, I want
Yeah.
to, but
Okay.
I haven't yet. Yeah.
So in House of Cards, when Frank is still alive and he is I believe he's the president.
Hmm.
So there's this invitation to a hypothetical event where a lot of movers and shakers of the, U.S. Um, mostly business, I want to say,
Hmm.
um, uh, plus the US president, and are invited to an outdoor multi-day event called Illusion Fields, is what
Okay.
they call it in the show. And I think it's a play on a real thing that actually invests in, let's say, corporate slash politics America, where people congregate at sometime in autumn. Um, at an outdoor event with like cabins and stuff where they hang out for a few days and then supposedly have discussions about projects that they want to do together. I mean, conspiracy people will say, "Oh my God, yeah, they carve up the world and create a new world order." I don't buy that necessarily, but sure. I mean, they would certainly discuss projects that they could do with each other,
Yes.
etc. Um, I think that's like a prototypical event if it exists in House of Cards. It does that does exactly what you're saying, right? So let's create a casual, nice, good time together, and as part of that, we all come to, perhaps business information and business that leads to business decisions, that leads to business action. So I think if it's that, absolutely.
So,
If on the
the
other,
reason. Oh, please go on. Please go
no,
on.
no, no, I was done. Go ahead, go ahead.
I think the reason why I think that format is great, and it actually perfectly, is perfectly consistent with what you and I have been saying. I think to pull off a event with the format like that successfully, it only works if you get the participants each to be very discerning with what events they choose to be in and why
Mm,
they're in the first place. So, for example, a participant in an event like that will not come with an agenda that, hey, I need to speak, right? I need to advertise myself, for example.
right.
And I think they come with an abundance mindset, and also a mindset of, hey, if I'm there, this must be worth my time. And so I contribute because it'll deliver an ROI for the time I invest in. And if you bring like minded individuals who similarly value their time, that's magical. That is great.
I think you're right. I agree. Yeah, and then I mean, there's absolutely no harm, and I think in the US they do that much better than Europe. Typically, I think Europeans know how to enjoy their life, etc. Many Europeans do, but I think the US have figured out much better how to actually combine work and fun.
Hmm.
And so the Europeans are better at separating it and having fun when they're having fun. I'm overgeneralizing, of course, but Americans are very, very, very skilled at actually creating a combination of the two, and I think that's a great thing, actually.
That is true. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. How is this in India handled, by the way? Is that even a thing, such an industry?
I think it's a rapidly evolving industry. I think it is definitely a lot more nascent than even what you have in Europe, for example.
And why
Right?
is that?
I think the concept is a lot still moves through relationships. A lot still moves through word of mouth, references, etc. So this is not to say that events, conferences, etc. don't happen. I think we need a few more cycles for the wider market or the wider audience to believe in the power in these things actually yielding a return.
Hmm.
I think we are in India. That's the sort of cycle we are in the midst of, where now these things are happening at scale, but the wider market has not yet realized this can yield returns. By the way, here
Interesting.
I'm not making a absolute statement. I'm making a relative statement relative to what the perception would be in Europe and especially the US.
Is there a cultural DNA to this where um, I don't know, it would be seen as low ROI to go there?
So not necessarily, I think, but the cultural aspect might be that networking, at least in the format that Americans have popularized, it comes less naturally or less organically in an Indian and maybe even an Asian context. It's more reputation based, more reference based, right? More word of mouth based as a starting
Interesting.
point. It is changing rapidly. So again, I don't want to define it in absolute terms, but in relative terms, it is changing, but there is still a marked difference.
Um, Quirky question. Is that also a reason why, for example, in India, it took India relatively long to even found a few highly reputed business schools? Because in the end, if you think about business schools
Yeah,
and the value of MBAs, a lot of it is actually attributed to networking and
you're
community.
right. I think you're spot on. You're right about that.
Oh,
So a
interesting.
lot of it also, of course, has to do with the evolution and development of economy, purchasing power, etc. So that also, of course, plays a role. But a lot of that is also what you just said, in what is
Fascinating.
perceived to be important, what is perceived to be driving value, etc.
Hmm. So tell me one thing. I
Hmm.
think I know your opinion, but
Hmm.
I want to make sure. Going to events for fundraising, and here you can take either the investor view, who fundraises from other investors, or the founder view, who raises from investors. What's your take?
So purely for that purpose, I've only attended, I think, one such event before. I must say, I really dreaded it. I won't name which event that is. It's a very popular event, very, very popular event for supposedly for GPs to meet LPs. I really dreaded it. Didn't enjoy the event at all. Um, I think the way these events are done, I think, again, I don't want to go too much into the format, because then perhaps people might be able to reverse engineer what kinds of events I'm talking about. But it actually makes it very difficult to organically do the fundraise. It makes it, the whole process feels very
Hmm.
choreographed and structured to such a degree where I would totally understand why an LP would be reluctant, at that point. So it's sort of like
Hmm.
a self-defeating process.
But then tell me, why do
What
the
I would
LPs go there?
I think there's also LPs who have the same social validation problem. I would, I've not been there before, but I have a feeling that's also going on, Patrick. I think a lot of
Oh man,
folks in the industry need to justify their profession, justify their time, justify what they're doing, and this is one outlet for it.
it's hilarious. Yeah, I think in venture, if you're a founder that wants to raise from venture, it's literally unnecessary. It's not required because the job of the investors is to actually find you, react to you, etc. And if they don't react to you, let's say sometimes as a founder, it can be very frustrating when you're reaching out to a fund that you don't have a warm introduction to and they don't care to reply. I always reply to
Hmm.
every email. It won't always be a yes, but I will reply. But and by the way, my answer won't actually be different if it's a warm introduction. But a lot of venture does work that way, and then that can be very
Yeah.
frustrating. And I'm thinking, hey, actually introducing myself and making a personal impression, etc., can perhaps lead to a different decision. It doesn't. So if the person on the other end is a venture investor that literally only prioritizes things that come through curation, you seeing them
Hmm.
in person and shaking their hand is not changing their principle, their MO.
Yeah.
So their job is to find you, be it um, in any kind of way possible, but without events. So the purpose of meeting VCs at events, if you want to go the venture route and if you want to be targeted by venture investors, that purpose does not exist. It's not required. Now, if it's different, right? So if you're
Hmm.
saying, hey, I want to meet lenders, for example, because I have perhaps more of a debt component
Yes.
to my business. Again, typical here the warm introduction will be even more important than in
Hmm.
any other asset class. But meeting people at a dedicated conference for your specific asset class, where actually institutional investors are coming to meet people in that asset class, that's actually a really good way of doing that and
Yes.
getting conversations going. In VC, in my opinion, it's absolutely not necessary. Um,
Yeah.
you can
I,
use your
I
time
would
better.
I would wholeheartedly agree with that.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, here we are on the way to our yearly event.
Yes, that is right.
Okay, cool.
Excellent.
Good discussion, sir. I hope to see you safe and sound on the other side.
You will, good sir. I wish you very safe travels.
Thanks, sir. Cheers.